Introduction to Human-Computer Interaction course on NPTEL. This is week 2 content. Let's continue on the topic of what is human-computer interaction and why it is so exciting. I'm hoping that you would have seen the lecture content from week 1, which gave you some introduction about what this course is all about, and we also talked a little bit about what HCI is, what is the context in which HCI is placed, and what should you keep looking for when you are doing this course. I hope you're also starting to look at the devices that you're using from a HCI point of view. So let's look at this concept of door handles. I'm sure we use door handles every day. There is multiple types of door handles that we end up actually seeing, using every day. So what I wanted to walk you through is just to tell you about different design decisions and design paradigms that people have thought through while coming up with these kind of door handles. These door handles are actually interesting design. For example, let's look at this one. I'm sure you would have seen this type of a door handle where it is kind of a push mode, right? And the reason why I said push mode is that looking at this, and it's also placed at your height of your hip or around that, and the natural tendency for looking at when you see such a door handle is only to push. And it is also designed in a way that one end of the door is actually locked, and when you push it, the lock actually opens through and the door opens, right? So, meaning this is one type of handle. I'm going to actually walk you through multiple types of door handles, where thing to keep in mind is what are the design decisions that people are using, design decisions that designers have thought through while coming up with these kind of different door handles. Here's another one, very similar to the other one, but in this door handle, half of it is actually projected, or it is projecting outside. When you push the first half, which is on this side, right hand side of the slide, when you push that, there's a lock at the right hand side slide end, and that lock actually gets pushed a little bit and the door opens. And another thing to also keep in mind with this and the earlier one design also is that in this design you can keep the hand on any corner of the handle and push it, and you need more force to push and open the door when you're far away from the direction in which the door is going to open, or the edge in which the door is going to open. It's the same thing here. So the thing to keep in mind is in both of this, it's more like a push action. Let's see a little bit more. Here is another one, right? In this, it is more like the door handle where most frequently used, I guess, it's just a little bit of a knob, you hold it, you turn it down, and then the question is whether you have to push it or pull it, right? And depending on, I'm sure many a times you would have realized that you would push the door handle down, and then you're like pushing it away or pulling it, and then the door is designed actually in the opposite direction, right? You pull it when it was pushed, you push it when it was actually pulled, right? It happens to me very often because you really don't know what is the natural process in which this kind of design decisions are made, the way I should be using. Here's another one. And this probably is the worst, and I'm sure if you have watched movies where when they show a small office, it has the half of the office have the door on the top. These kind of doors are used in those situations, right? And majority of the times it's like the pull or the push mode that is kept there. And interestingly, concept to take away from this door design is that it is a bad idea to actually have the action to be done to be written on the door itself. I think as a designer itself, one of the big takeaways from knowing these kind of designs is that you should not have the action to be done on top of the design interface that you're making for the user to do. It should be intuitive, it should be natural for the user to do, and that's when the interface will become popular, and that's when people will like the interface, that's when users would actually want to come back to use the interface that you have developed. I hope that helps you to get a sense of some design thinking through the door handles itself. Let me just quickly tell you, door handles come in different form, and different forms actually have different ways of using it also. One big takeaway from this is that it is also going to keep, like for example, last time also we discussed a little bit about differences between different types of devices, kettle, a car and a cockpit, all that, right? So it is going to be in a particular context in which you're actually designing all this, right? And that's where you want to keep in mind. And as a designer, you really don't want to put what action to be taken. Just imagine if Uber does the same thing. When you're using the Uber interface, it is saying, press it here and click here for booking the cab, right? If you're going to do all that, the design is going to become very cluttered and design is not going to be very appreciated. Why is bad design important? I think bad design is important because a lot of money gets lost and people make a lot of mistakes while looking at these kind of bad designs. While using these bad designs, people make mistakes also. So money, reputation, time is getting wasted. All of that happens because of bad design. And today, if you really think about it, the question about hardware, the question about storage space, this question about computation is all gone. I mean, nobody really cares about the computation that is needed to do a job. Nobody really cares about what storage we really need to actually store the amount of data that you're collecting, right? Because storage has become cheaper, computing has become cheaper. So the more and more success is going to happen to systems which think more carefully about concepts or content like the reliability, security, usability, which is what this course is all about. And if you really think about, computing is everywhere. So I think computing has become more and more common to everybody who's using any sort of device, any sort of instrument. Here are some interesting thoughts to keep in mind while thinking about design also. Some quotes. You need an engineering degree from MIT to work this. Technology changes rapidly, people change slowly. The first one is mostly referring to a microwave oven and a projector remote control. As you can clearly understand, we change actually very slowly. The technologies, just imagine just 5 years before, the Ubers and Olas were not popular. Technology has evolved so rapidly, but we take time in adapting these technologies. I remember actually even getting on to Uber. I was visiting Bangalore. One of my friend who hosted me just flipped a few buttons here and there and I got a cab. I got dropped off at the airport and I had to not even pay him. And my friend who was sitting somewhere else actually paid for the whole trip, right? So when I saw this for the first time, it was actually interesting experience. And given that I also use technology, it took me some time in even getting to know such services are available. So I'm sure there are people who change much more slowly than people like you and me who use technology regularly. Here are some good designs that you can actually keep in mind. And these are some services that you use actually very regularly. Google is something everybody uses. The interface of Google has been very, very simple. And later in the lecture, later in the course, we'll actually look at Google's and eBay's and Microsoft's services, how their website services has evolved over a period of time. And the services like Uber and Google Maps, which are very recent, also have very good interfaces. And these interfaces have been also evolving depending on the feedback, depending on the way that the users are using the system. Here is one example of Uber itself. The old design is on the right hand side, the new design is on the left hand side. Again, let me iterate this thought that these companies collect a lot of data about what we do using these interfaces because they have a large set of users. Using these statistics about how users are behaving while using these systems actually help them to make a lot of decisions. Right? So when you go to google.com, the kind of search that you do, the kind of websites that you click on is actually getting tracked, and that can be used for making some decisions. In the same way, in the Uber, the kind of clicks that you're making, I want to book a cab, I'm looking at the time, which is in this case, on the left-hand side, you can see it's about 5 minutes. Knowing the information that the cab is actually 5 minutes away from where I am is actually useful information, which can be very useful in making a decision, whether I want to book it now, I want to book it later. And I'm sure Uber and Ola's have taken these kind of information from the users and used it for making design decisions. So ultimately what I'm trying to tell you is that there is a whole set of parameters and metrics that you will use while making these design decisions. And each of us build technologies, each of us build applications for different contexts. And our design decisions are going to be dependent on the context, dependent on the constraints that you have, dependent on the limitations that you also have. Here is another question that I will pose you. I'm sure all of you have taken elevators. I'm sure some of you have taken elevators in the last couple of days. You would invariably see a mirror either outside the elevator, where you're waiting for the elevator, or a mirror inside the elevator. Sometimes all three sides of the elevators are actually mirror. And if you go to a 5-star hotel, sometimes the floor where you're waiting, or every floor where you're waiting, actually has a lot of mirrors in front of the elevator and even inside the elevator. Any guess on why do you think elevators have mirrors outside and inside? I'm sure many of you have taken elevators in the last couple of days. And I'm sure you've taken elevators where there is mirror outside the elevator, and sometimes there is mirrors inside the elevator also. Any thoughts on why do you think the elevators have mirrors? It's probably one of the very good decisions that somebody made at some point in time, why mirrors have to be placed inside or outside the elevator. The reason is, when you see an elevator, when you want to get into an elevator, when let's take the elevator is in the 7th floor or 8th floor, when you're on the ground floor, and when you call the elevator, if you have a mirror around the elevator, what you're going to do is you're going to probably check your hair, you're probably going to check your face. You're distracted by looking at the mirrors around the elevators. And this allows the company which is working on the elevator to even if the elevators take a few seconds a little later, you're not really concerned about it. So the basic idea is that keeping the mirrors outside the elevator, they have actually got you distracted into your own self. So even if the elevator is a little late, you're not going to be concerned. Even if the elevator is a little dirty or outside or inside, you're not going to really look at it. That's one of the reasons. And another reason why mirrors inside the elevator helps is that people actually feel, for people who are claustrophobic, people who are worried about closed doors, they are actually going to feel a little better, because mirrors around probably have people, like for example in this case, you see multiple images of the same person. It's kind of a little bit soothing having the mirror inside the elevator. And sometimes you also think that because of this mirror, it also looks like it's very spacious. That's the reason why elevators have mirrors. So one of the next important question that we're going to look at is how to understand users' needs. I'm sure by now you've convinced yourself that users' needs are very, very important, which I think is in the process of designing iterative design. Designing any products, there is, even now I was explaining about Uber collecting data and using that for making decisions. What are they doing? They're actually taking users, your input and my input, on how we use the interface as inputs to redesigning their system. So two things that you can think about understanding user needs. We'll actually go through this process of user needs, understanding user needs in more detail as we progress in this week and later parts of the course. But for now, talk to people who are paying your work, because they're the people who want what, they're the people who are looking for something from what you're doing. Or talk to people who know the users well, because many times it's going to be hard to get the users themselves. For example, if you're talking to, let's take, if you're building a technology which is for senior citizens, or if you're building a technology which is for pilots, it's not necessarily easy for you to get users, access to users very easily. So therefore, you should talk to people who are actually who know these users well. Proxy users are not the best users that you can collect data from. But if you can't get the real users, proxy users are the only way to collect the data. These are only good starting points, but these are not going to be sufficient. Which is that these are not going to just help you to actually build good interface, build usable systems. Right. So we're going to look at this understanding collecting data from users more and more as we go progress in this lecture. Ethnography is an area in which people actually study how researchers study how people use a design, a technology, a process, right? Ethnography is the study in which researchers or companies are interested in studying how end users use a technology, a platform, an interface, a design, all of that. And I know researchers and engineers who are part of this ethnographic team in large companies like Intel, Google, Microsoft, right? All of them have ethnographers who actually study people and study people in a different context, in a given context, in a context that the companies are interested in. How people use phones, how people use laptops, how people use iPads, how people use phones when they're traveling in the metro, how people use phones when they're in actually an aeroplane, how people use when they're actually in a bike in India. Now let's look at a concept called contextual inquiry. It is a quick and dirty form of ethnography. There are many ways to actually find what users think, right? You could think of actually asking a questionnaire in a survey. You could think of doing a lab study where you get users into your office and collect data. You could actually do other forms of data collection to know what users are thinking. So one of the methods is called contextual inquiry. So we'll look at this concept of contextual inquiry in detail to understand what this method is, what kind of data can you collect, how this data will be useful, and what are the other parameters to keep in mind while you're actually doing contextual inquiry. Let's think about this concept of market research. Some of you may have heard this word, market research. It's a very common word that is used to say that, oh, let's do market research to collect some data about what users think. That's one way that you would have heard this statement. So I want to compare this contextual inquiry and market research. So in market research, what happens is you learn a few things about 1,000 people. That is, you're going out to collect data to understand what people think about. Let's take this remote for slide changer. Right? So you're collecting large amount of data to understand. Let's take some questions about is it convenient to hold? Is it working properly in a distance? Does it have, what kind of problems does it have? All these kind of questions that you could ask from 1,000 people to understand what users think. But what it focuses on is what people say. That is, what do I giving my responses to these questions. But it does not focus on why I actually do what I do or how I do what I do, right? So therefore, market research is all about understanding a few things about 1,000 people, whereas in contrary, if you really look at it, the contextual inquiry is a concept where you learn 1,000 things about a few people. Another way of saying it is that you get some people into the lab, you get them to do something, record everything, see what they're doing, how they're doing, why they're doing, ask them questions about it, and record it, and then actually understand how users behave in the given context. So therefore, in the contextual inquiry, the focus that we're going to have is on what people do, compared to what people say. It is basically the difference of perception and reality, so to say. I say something about a particular topic, but I actually do differently. For example, I say that, I won't actually click on link when the email is coming from an account which I don't know about. Whereas when I get an email like that, I'll probably click the link and see what this link is all about. So I hope that gives you a sense of what the difference is between contextual inquiry and market research. We'll spend more time on this idea of contextual inquiry in this lecture. So one thing that you have to keep in mind in throughout this process, and many of you I can see that are taking this course who are already working in a company, or even if you're students, one thing that you want to keep in mind is that customer is the king. That is the user in this case. Whoever is going to use your app, whoever is going to actually download your system and use it is going to be the king, because they are going to decide whether your app is going to get popular. They're going to decide how many users are, whether they're going to talk about this app to others and promote your app. So one other idea that you want to know in terms of contextual inquiry is that the idea of think aloud. Let me just explain how think alouds would work, or how you should actually try and get think alouds from users. A think aloud is a study in which you collect data where you get users to speak about what they are thinking. For example, if I were to actually ask a user to do a think aloud in terms of using this remote. So as a user, this is how I would actually come into the study and do it. Okay, thank you for giving me the remote. I'll try and say what I'm actually thinking about while using this remote. There is a button here in the middle, which if I press, I'm able to see the lighter. I'm able to see the red light on the pointer wherever I want to keep it. And there is a right side and a left side button, which when I click, I'm able to move from right and left. And there is also a button which for it to make it blank screen, or hide everything on the slide and make it black. And there's an on and off button on the left hand side. That's one type of a think aloud. Here is another think aloud that you could think about. Let's take if I get emails. Let's take if I'm looking at my email inbox. I look at my email inbox, and then you, as an administrator of the study, you asked me to say, do a think aloud on this email inbox. First email, it's an email from a student who is asking me for working with me. I open the email, I read the email, I move on to my next email. Next email is actually saying Microsoft is asking me to update the password on Skype. A third email is about another query about whether you can actually give a talk in this particular time in this particular location. I would actually just reply to this email and say whether I am available or not. So that's the kind of think aloud that you want to do. You want to collect data or let the user speak what they are thinking. I'm looking at the remote. I want to go to the left slide, so I'm clicking on the link. I want to go to the right side, I'm moving on the right. I want to actually point at a particular slide and say this is what I'm speaking. I'm clicking the circular button in the middle. That's a short think aloud. So you should get the users to do this think aloud. So one thing you want to keep in mind again, also in contextual inquiries, you want to interrupt and ask questions also at some point in time to the users. You will also keep these questions minimal because you don't want to influence the user. You don't want to, there's another idea called priming. You don't want to prime the user by asking more and more questions or suggesting what you were thinking while the user is doing the study. There's a lot of literature to show that when the administrator is inside the room or when the administrator is with the user, the way that they behave versus when you collect the data with the user, when the administrator is not inside the room or with the user, is actually very different. So this kind of research questions have been asked for quite some time in saying, what is the influence of the administrator who's actually collecting this data? So you don't want to prime the user. That's my bottom line point. So what you're interested in contextual inquiry, as I said before, is understanding why, how, and where, right? So I'm going to talk about this more as we move forward. Now that's a brief introduction about contextual inquiry. Now let's look at other aspects of contextual inquiry. Some principles that you want to keep in mind is that one is the context, right? In contextual inquiry, the main idea is that you as an administrator for the study should go to the place where you're collecting the data. Let's take, for example, if you're collecting data from rickshawala, or you're collecting data from the auto drivers or people who serve food in the hotels. So you have to go to the place where they work and collect data from them. Contextual is referring to the context where the users are and collect data accordingly from the users. So that's what it says. Go to the workplace and see the work as it unfolds, right? And being in the place where things happen can help memory, right? So when you see people, what they do, when you see how professors are actually handling their projector remote, or when you see how gardener is handling a particular instrument, that helps you to build the understanding better. When you ask people, people generally will actually speak less, and most of the people will only summarize what they want to say. But for doing the contextual inquiry very well, what we need is actually details. So we should go to one of the other reasons why you want to go to the location of the workplace, location of where people are, your end users are, is because if you just speak to them, they're just going to summarize it to you what they're doing. But what you need is, as an administrator, as a researcher, as a person who's designing the system, you need more and more details. Another thing that you want to keep in mind while collecting data for the contextual inquiry is actually watch out for these kind of words. Generally, typically we do this. So when users say all this, I think it's a better idea to just probe them on what do they mean, probe them on asking, saying, can I see an email that you're referring to? Can I see how you do this? Can I see how you do that? What does this help? This helps you in actually finding out what they're actually saying. They may be saying something, but they actually are meaning something else. So by probing more, what you end up getting data from the end users is you end up getting data which is more detailed, which is something that you can use for making decisions instead of just saying, oh, I do it this way. I go to the class, click on the switch on the projector, click on the remote for the input, and I start my lecture. That's just summary. I mean, I think what you need in the contextual inquiry is more detail than what I just now said. So keep a watch for these kind of words and these kind of users who are giving you such level of details. Here is an example. So these are just screenshots or images from contextual inquiry done with fire extinguishers. Right? Administrator is talking to the users and trying to get inputs and seeing how they actually do things while they are actually getting out to solve a problem. So one thing that you have to keep in mind is in contextual inquiry, you're going to get a lot of data when you collect these kind of details, when you collect these kind of information from contextual inquiry, when you collect information from the users. But you can't use all the data, right? So the point is you can't use all the data that you collected. You have to somehow figure out a way which is important, which is not important. And you also need a good interpretation of the data that you're collecting. You can't have interpretations, you can't have conclusions from the data that is not very useful to you, or you can't make wrong interpretations also. So make sure that you collect data in which you are able to actually find a connection to the user when you're making inferences. That is, when you collect data, make sure that you have, so one another suggestion that I generally have for people collecting these kind of data is make sure that you don't name the user in the Excel sheet or place where you're keeping the data. It is better to keep it as user 1, user 2, user 3 for protecting the anonymity of the users. You can keep the connection of the users and the actual names or the pseudonymous names that you have given and the actual name somewhere in a table, but the data that you're keeping and the data that you're going to use for analysis and the data that you may be sharing with others, try and avoid having the names of the users. But the point here is that you want to make sure that you have the connection between who said what, and at any point in time you should be able to go connect to the user who said that particular statement. This just helps you in figuring out the right kind of interpretations because the demographics of these users also matters, right? You don't want to make connections, you don't want to make interpretations that are not the right interpretations and not connecting to the right user who said it. And you also want to make sure that people are comfortable while talking to you and while giving you information about the facts, about the actions that they do while collecting the information for the contextual inquiry. So the first principle is the context. Now let's look at another principle that you want to keep in mind. You want to keep in mind the concept of focus. And this is something that you will see again and again in this course, which is focus on what information that you're trying to get out of the user. You're looking for a specific type of questions, you're looking for specific kind of information from the user. The user may be doing 100 other things while the professor may be doing 100 other things while teaching in the class, but you're not interested in all of them. You're just interested in how they use the remote while interacting with the projector. So you have to actually find a way to steer the conversation to useful topics that is relevant to you, and you want to actually make sure that the users are not getting carried away, right? Carried away in their own thoughts, in their own think aloud that they are telling you. For example, if you go back to some of the studies that I've done a lot of studies on these users, with users in the context of phishing. And there have been users in the user studies that I've done where users get involved, meaning one of the study where I showed them X number of emails and I asked them to react to it. And then users actually start, one of the email that user was shown was an email coming from a bank asking them to update their password. And the user got actually carried away by telling me experiences of that they have had in giving away this password and their account getting compromised and all of that, which is okay to some extent because which is a good data point for the user study. But I think it needs to be focused. User needs to be brought back to the context in which the data is getting collected. And another concept that you want to keep in mind in this principle of focus is be a good listener, because another thing that we end up as administrator of the study is that you're just always curious about finding out what you want from the user, and you're pushing the users here and there to get inputs, asking them questions, clarifying and everything while collecting the data. I think that's not a very good idea. I think what you want to be is you want to listen to what the user is saying and then probably probe when they're finished with their line of thought, when they're finished with their conversation with you, at least to the question that you've asked, not the entire study, then probe them and ask them some questions. Do not cut the views of the users. Don't cut short the users when they're speaking in the study. This is not just for contextual inquiry, this is for generally the data that you may be collecting for any of the user studies that you're doing. So what you want to keep in mind is the context in contextual inquiry and focus, which is collecting data. So these two are just the statements that you want to keep in mind. These are more like philosophical statements. Take the attitude that nothing any person does is done for no reason. If you think that it is for no reason, you don't need to understand the point of view from which it makes sense. Right? Many of the times people do a lot of things around you and you feel like, why? This is so weird. But it's just that you want to keep in mind that it is not weird for them. It is probably weird for you, but they are doing it for some particular reason. Take the attitude that nothing any person does is unique to them. It always represents an important class of customers whose needs will not be met if you don't figure out what's going on. Right? So that's a second, so to say, philosophy that you want to keep in mind is to take the attitude that nothing any person does is unique to them, because any user, the way that they behave is actually representing a class of people. Nobody is so unique, even though there is a philosophy also to say that everybody is unique by themselves, but you can put all the unique people together in a particular way, you will probably see a cluster of people who are looking very similar. Right? These are general philosophies that you want to keep in the back of your mind while doing the user studies, while talking to users, while doing this design and interacting with users. This will just help you to be more, so another key word that is very relevant in a course like HCI, in a concept of interacting with users, is actually empathy. Empathy to users, right? You want to make sure that you understand what the users are trying to tell you rather than pushing them hard on trying to get what you want them to say. Here are some quick ways of thinking about how to conduct a contextual inquiry. Now that many of you will have, or all of you will have phones which are voice recorders and video recorders also. So probably a technology that you want is only a phone. Generally what you want to do is you want to have a questionnaire which has some set of questions, very focused, that you're trying to collect data from the users on what you are interested in, and make sure that you deal with the ethical issues, which I'll actually come back in a few minutes about what are the different things that you want to keep in mind while doing user studies, while talking to users, while collecting data. And another thing that you want to also keep in mind is generally a good way of collecting data would be there is the study that you want to do, there's this data that you want to collect. You can do a pre-study, which is where you collect data about demographics of the user, probably some screening questions that you can keep, which will decide whether the user is going to be part of the study or not. And then there is also a post-study. So for example, in many of these user studies that I have done, where what I've done is the pre-study would be more like demographics, gender, age, occupation. Give them some questions about how they would react in a particular situation when a particular email comes. Depending on the answer to the question that they give, I actually decide whether to keep the participant in my study or not, right? Because you don't want all these participants in the study are very similar or very different. And in the post-study, you want to also collect information about the users, from the users, about some questions like in the post-study, you could actually talk about, in the phishing context, you could talk about asking, so what did you think about the study? Was the interventions that we showed made sense? And how would you make the interventions better, right? These are the kind of questions that you could actually ask in the post-study. When you move from one set of questions to another set of questions, just tell the users that this is what you're trying to do. Okay, here is an important one. I think this slide, even though it just shows you bullet points, there are some important things that you want to take away. Structure, after the study is done or while doing the contextual inquiry, in generally getting into the contextual inquiry itself, debrief the user. When the study is done, make sure that you're actually telling the user what you are trying to study, what kind of information are you looking for. Even if it's possible, quickly summarize what you got from the user while collecting the data. This will be very, very helpful for the user to go back with something that you did in the study. You don't want to do a study where you got the user did the study, he said thank you, and the user left, right? So that may not be the best way of actually collecting data from users. So in terms of actually ethical issues, in the last slide I had this one thing called as ethical issues. Just take a look at the content under consent, IRB, and compensation. So there is a online small short training program which is necessary for doing user studies. There's a flyer that you may use to get users to your study. There's a proposal, there's an application for getting your study approved, there's a consent form. Right? So the idea for me to tell you that these things about doing a contextual inquiry, actually about any way interacting with a user, is to actually make it more concrete, make it more to a standard, and make also, meaning there is also an expectation that you will treat the users well, you will not abuse the data that you're collecting and things like that. There is this IRB, which is Institutional Review Board, where you have to get your studies approved for any studies where human beings are involved, where you're collecting data. IRB is necessary. And many institutes now in India, many research organizations now in India are also trying to make sure that they have this ethical board, ethics committee. All of these small committees have been created in organizations where you want to get these approvals. Even if you're working for a company, even if you're doing research on this topic, even if you're a student, it's better to get some approval for collecting this data, because you don't want to be in trouble, you don't want to have after effects of a user study which is affecting your university or your research labs or your company. I will show you examples of each one of them, walk you through slowly about what they are, how you should build one in the next week, not now. I'm just going to tell you more of contextual inquiry and lead into how some conclusions can be derived from contextual inquiry. Now, where are we? So now what has happened is you did the contextual inquiry, you went to the workplace, got some data, you come back with these large set of notes, recordings and everything. Now what is the next thing we should do? We should actually find some inferences from this, right? At the end of the day, we're not interested in just the process of collecting data. At the end of the day, we are interested in actually taking these nodes and converting them into some kind of inferences which you can probably use. So the goal is figuring out what is important. So one of the main ways by which you can actually figure out what is important from a contextual inquiry, generally from a user study where you collected qualitative data, is something called as affinity diagram. How does this affinity diagram works? In this week we also have a short lab kind of a thing where TAs would tell you how affinity diagrams are created. For the entire course, what we have done is we are getting some hands-on experience for you also, where TAs will behave as though they are users, behave as though they are administrators of the study, and do the data collection, and we are going to put that recording also online so you can actually see how it is done. One of the things that we will upload for this week is about affinity diagramming. How do you create an affinity diagram from the data that you have collected? And I'm hoping that students in the class are actually going to do some exercises and go out, talk to users, collect data, create the affinity diagram, and actually post it to us. So that's something we're hoping that we will actually get you to do as part of this course. So what you want to do is, okay, so you spoke to 10 people. Let's take you speaking to people who are trying to book cab for going from point A to point B. That's the, let's take a project that you're doing. You want to actually redesign the interface of an app like Uber, or create a new solution which is actually talking about going from point A to point B, cab service. You spoke to like 20 users, you got some information. Now what do? You want to find relationships between users, you want a relationship between groups that you spoke to. So one of the things that you want to make sure you do is actually to write down the transcription of the interviews that you did, recordings that you have. Not necessarily all the words, ums and ahs and everything. What do you want to make sure that you want to at least capture the important feedback that you got from the users. And there's going to be large set of wall that you may need for doing this, where you have multiple color post-its. You write a concept that is coming out of the interview that you're listening, or the notes that you took, one concept per post-it, and stick it onto the wall. As the concepts are coming out of the interview data that you've collected, just keep writing them and put them on the wall. Now, once this concepts are on the wall, now what you want to do is you want to actually do some kind of clustering, so to say. Bring the concepts that are very clear, very nearby, close to each other into one cluster, so to say. Like for example, there could be a feedback when the user started, they're saying that, oh, I'm actually looking for booking a cab from point A to point B, and I would like to see how many cabs are available, number of the ratings of the cabs with the cab itself, that is available to me on my interface, right? That's an input. So this is multiple inputs was there. One is number of cabs available, then the ratings of the drivers. So these are all information that you can actually capture it in the interface level, or probably let's take it's a cab level. So you put all of that together. Again, in the example that we'll show you, there will be concrete information, but now I'm giving you the idea for how to collect, how to infer, how to create the affinity diagram, which can be helpful in making some inferences. Yeah, so this is just walking through the process. Everyone gets a pad of sticky notes. If you're working in a group, use the wall, general process, one key concept or observation per sticky, cluster similar items as you go, label the emerging themes, right? So you kind of put them all together, and then when you see that all of them are talking about just the interfaces, and all of them are talking about drivers, all of them are talking about errors in the system, so you can just create the themes out of the data that you've collected itself. So when you're done with the affinity diagram, these are the ways. I have some examples, a few images here which will tell you how an affinity diagram will look when you're done. Here is one affinity diagram where you will see that different colors have been used and different concepts have been written on top of it. Here is another example where they have actually highlighted of saying that the social relevant feedback from the users are kept in one place. The other set of feedback or the inputs that they got from users are kept in different parts of the wall or the desk or wherever you're putting these post-its. Here's another one. The partition in between shows that there are two types of, the left one and the right one are different clusters that has been created, and you can see different colors put together to create a theme, and there's themes written on top of every cluster. Right? So these are the outcomes that you're going to generally end up having while finishing up an affinity diagram. So with that, what I'll do is I will actually wrap up this idea of contextual inquiry, collecting data from the users, collecting how to collect this data, what do you need while collecting this data, how to actually synthesize this data, and create this affinity diagram, which will be helpful in making suggestions, making interpretations of the data that you collected. So in this week, we're also going to do a few other things in the site. So another set of video is going to be for creating, how do you do contextual inquiry? There's TAs who are going to interact to create contextual inquiry interactions itself. And there will be output how to create an affinity diagram, and we'll also have a little bit of Photoshop tool, how to actually use Photoshop, what kind of features do you need in terms of interface level inputs for you to create it. Right? So that will help you to get a sense of start thinking about interfaces also in parallel, because I think as an HCI course you want to also get your hands dirty, because it is not going to be something just by listening to my lectures you're not going to get all the important aspects of becoming an interesting or a person who can solve problems by designing useful and usable interfaces.